do men want?
Manifests itself in relationships, and you feel it in relationships, and they can be very powerful spiritually. And if that's what you need, that's what you should go for.
And she said, oh, I'm going to go do a sweat lodge this evening. And I begged her to take me along, and that was about 6 years ago.
Welcome to Speaking of Men. You're watching public access television from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. The word politic has a Latin root, politicus, and it relates to the act of being a citizen. Belonging to the body politic in those days was of vast importance to an individual, and yet today many Americans take it for granted. This being a citizen is not something we should take lightly, and especially in our times. This is an election year, and today we're lucky to have Republican State Senator for District 19, Les Houston. Senator Houston has 15 years experience in the State Senate, and he's currently the Republican leader for the State Senate. And Senator Houston, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Mike, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and your viewers.
Thank you. We'd like to, maybe we could begin by just having you tell us a little bit about what brought you into politics.
You know, Mike, I know that you have a great appreciation for history, as I do. In studying American history, and I know we don't do that as much in schools as we did when you and I were going to school, and realizing that the system of government that we now have in place was going to provide me with an opportunity to pursue the profession I wanted to pursue the religion I wanted to pursue, if I wanted to travel to another state. I came from a coal mining family, and I realized that in many countries I wouldn't have those opportunities, but in this country we did. And as I would look at history and think about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and all those people, it's just like they jumped off the pages at you, because they're people just like you and me. You know, they had their fears and their desires. And what really impressed me is the fact that these people were willing to put it on the line. For what? We know there's one thing in life that is worth more than life itself, and that's the way that life is lived. And if that were not so, then we wouldn't fight the great wars that we fought. We wouldn't have people making all these sacrifices, because freedom is so important. Freedom of choice is so important to men and women. And if you go back historically and you look at the history of mankind, after pursuit of food and shelter, man has spent more of his time trying to design some form of government, some system, where we can live together in an organized fashion. And after all government is a bunch of rules that we try to comply with so that we can enjoy some individual freedoms. And at the same time that we're doing that, we're able to live together collectively, because you can have freedoms that by exercising that freedom is taking a freedom away from someone else, because it's a matter of degrees. I think that we do it better than this country, than it's ever been done in the history of mankind. And realizing from looking at history that it didn't happen in a vacuum, I suddenly became aware of the fact that as someone who was going to be the beneficiary of all those efforts that went on before me, that I had an obligation to all those people who went before me, as if I had signed a legal contract on the dotted line saying, when it comes my turn, with whatever ability that I have, I'm going to try and make my contribution to protect the system that we have, and if possible, improve on it. And looking at it that way, I realized that the only way that there's many ways to do that. For me personally, not only did I want to go vote, and when I say vote, I wanted to try to be informed on what the issues were and be informed about the candidates, and hopefully cast an informed vote. I think probably the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life is it makes no difference how you vote as long as you vote. Now, if it's important to vote, then it's extremely important to cast an informed vote. And I'm not talking about you're agreeing with me on an issue. I'm talking about if we sit down and discuss an issue and we have a difference of opinion, that we can have some dialogue in our discussion because you've put some time out and made an effort to understand what that is. So it was not just enough to participate by voting. I wanted to play a bigger role. I wanted to become involved in this system that our forefathers have created and do my part in trying to make it work. You know, one of the things that happens today that's a great concern to us, and I don't know how we're going to reverse it, Mike, and we talk about it all the time, is, you know, our system of democracy, whether it be at the state level or in Congress or even at the city council level, we have a system either by design or by chance. It's awkward, it's clumsy, it's inefficient, and it brings together people, and you have a great deal of conflict going on. And if you'll give me, I know I'm taking a lot of time.
No, it's quite all right.
Let's take in Santa Fe. We're meeting in Santa Fe now, and this is on a Saturday, the first week, and I came down for this interview. 112 of us are now meeting in Santa Fe. That's 42 senators and 70 House members. Now, before we can appropriate $1 for whatever program we're working on, we have to have a consensus where the majority of us in the House and the majority in the Senate will agree. In addition to that, the way our system is designed, you have the governor who must sign that, and then you have about 900 lobbyists that represent every aspect of different types of lives in New Mexico that's up there trying to encourage us or to influence us to do it either this way or that way. Now, the people who are watching, if you're married, or if you have a relationship with another individual, or if you've been involved in a partnership, folks, it's tough for two people to agree on these things. And what happens is that the system is there. I didn't create it, and neither did the Democratic leadership create it. It's created by our forefathers. In order to make it work, our philosophies come into conflict. Now, instead of the news media reporting to the citizens that there's this great philosophical debate going on in Santa Fe as to whether or not we should put more money into schools or perhaps take some of that money, which has been the case here in the last 2 or 3 years, and you put it into welfare-type programs or health-type programs. Instead of reporting on those philosophical differences, they report on the individuals. For instance, I'm the Republican leader. I will have conflict with the Democratic leader philosophically. Because after all, I'm nothing more than a personal extension or personification of the philosophy that I'm there representing, and that philosophy obviously represents the majority of the people in my district and representative government, or I wouldn't be there, they'd have someone else there. Unfortunately, the press will have headlines that there's a conflict between Les Houston and Tito Chavez, who's the Democratic leader, or Manny Aragon, who is the pro tem. It's not a conflict between us individually, it's a conflict between the philosophical differences. So I know that's, to get involved in it, I decided that it was not enough for me just to vote, that I felt an obligation to those people who went before me to attempt to get involved inside the process to make it work.
That's great. You know, we have a short break coming up as a commentary from our producer, and we hope that you guys will stay with us because we will be right back.
In September 1990, William J. Scott began looking for his son Billy, whom he hadn't seen in more than 6 years. Unknown to William, Billy also began a search for his father a few weeks later. In early December, Billy Scott appeared with us on Speaking of Men, hoping to get the word to his father. If you know William J. Scott, won't you help us reunite them? Here's what we know about Billy's father. William J. Scott was reported to have been living in the Albuquerque area for the past 5 years. He's 31 years old, 6 foot 1 inches tall, with brown hair and blue eyes. He may have been working in a local sawmill or lumber yard, though he may be contemplating a move to Alaska. If you have any idea where William J. Scott is, please tell him to call me, Mike Kruchowski, at 268-5260, and we'll find a way to get father and son together again.
There are nearly 500,000 abused, neglected, and abandoned children in America today, and sooner or later most of them will end up here, in a courtroom, where a judge will try to decide what's best for each child's future. And that's where you come in. As a CASA volunteer, a court-appointed special advocate for children, you could be a child's voice in court. It's important work and very gratifying. Be a CASA volunteer. Speak up for a child.
Amnesty International has local chapters all over the world. Joining a chapter is one of the most direct ways of helping a victim in another country. A person like yourself. It works. You can stop torture. You can free prisoners. You can save lives. Join us.
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. This is Public Access Television from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. Joining us in the studio today is State Senator Les Houston. We're talking about the importance of politics in the average man's life. Senator, as the so-called men's movement has begun to emerge here, we've realized that the feminist movement has been political right from the beginning. In fact, I saw Gloria Steinem the other night. She said that the whole point of feminism was to create revolution in America, and it certainly has on some levels. Women almost seem to be intuitively tuned in to what things mean, how things are political, and men are a little slow on that. I wondered if you could give us some basic examples of just ground level nuts and bolts ideas about how politics work.
Well, I think that the reason that women have been so political of recent years is that all of us must admit that when it comes to certain opportunities that women had in the workplace, and et cetera, that they were behind the curve. So they had a goal out here and something that you can rally around. It's much easier to take something that you can put in very simple terms and get a group that's got, because these women have all kinds of diverse interests. You've got liberal women, politically speaking. You got some who are conservative. They have different viewpoints on issues, but when they have a goal up here that they realize that they're not getting their fair share, and they really haven't. And they have not had as much input as they should have had in making these decisions at the top level by having women in those places. So it's easy to rally people around. The men, of course, have had most of the elective offices over the years. They make more in the marketplace for their skills than the woman who has the same skills. So it's very difficult to rally them. Now, the interesting thing is that
again, they take it for granted, right?
Yes, they do. And most men who is honored by being in elective office, as a rule, would not be there had it not been for the cumulative support of women. Women, for whatever reason, identify with candidates on a more personal basis than men do. They are more readily willing to stand up publicly and say, I support Mike Rivas. I believe that he can do this, he can do that. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the macho thing about men, and I really don't understand what it is, and I've examined that myself. Men are a little more reluctant to stand up and say, okay, like Les Houston, stand up and say, I support Mike Rivas. The women are making great strides, as they should, and women bring a little different perspective to many different political issues than men do because they've had different experiences. So I would think that as the politics progress in this country, you're going to see a greater role played by women, and they've got a saying now that they want to do more than just like envelopes, because men basically are pretty lazy when it comes to politics, been my experience. And I personally, when I'm getting ready to run for a political office, is I would much rather have, as a rule, women who come over and say, we want to support your candidacy, than I would men, because when it comes time to do the hard work, the little bolts and nuts things that you have to get a campaign running, right, the women will show up. They're more responsible.
You bet.
The man will call you on the phone and say, God, Les, I'd like to be there, but something just came up.
You know, we were just jumping around a little bit. Well, basically what you're saying is men kind of half-step.
They do
Don't
for a
just
fact.
won't come out and make a stand and put the stake in the ground and go for it.
Absolutely.
And women are, well, it may be because men are just not clear a lot of times on what it is they're trying to do. Our producer, Mike Kruchowski, was telling me that the average sound bite, you know, this being an election year, presidential election, the average sound bite is less than 10 seconds for a political candidate. I wondered if you might have some things to say about how Republican or Democrat, potential voter, could go about getting a little more clear picture of the people who are running.
Mike, all of us have this great concern, and we discuss it. And then when it comes time to put up or shut up, your statewide candidates, and sometimes even in your district, but your statewide and your federal candidates, will attempt to secure for themselves the best so-called political operative analyst that they can. And what that person's job is that you take a piece of bologna sometimes and you dress it up and make it look like they're getting ready to serve you steak. And a lot of that goes back to the way we market products in this country. Because we're now used to being able to sit in your living room and somebody's on there every few minutes telling you that you need product X, Y, and Z, and here's why you need it. And they've suddenly realized that oftentimes it's not the substance of the product that's important, it's the way it's packaged. Does the package, is it appealing to the eye?
It's the sizzle,
Sure,
not
when
the
you go through
steak.
the marketplace, are you going to pick out this package or that package? Unfortunately, that has boiled over into politics. I would think that in a, say in a state senate race, we're getting ready to all stand for re-election, we are standing for re-election, every person in any district in this state that wants to know something about the people running for office will have an opportunity to do that. We customarily will send out all different types of flyers trying to explain some of our basic philosophies. And what I recommend that people look for is not how does Les Houston or Joe Doak stand on this proposition as opposed to that proposition, because after we're elected, Mike, my God, we're up there dealing, in a 60-day session, we will sometimes deal with 1,500 different issues. Now, what do legislators really do? What does a legislative body in a free society actually do? A few years ago, we came home and we'd only passed 200 and some bills. And the headlines were a do-nothing legislature. This is a press for you again. I happened to have an opportunity to address a large Kiwanis club in town a couple days after we came home. And I asked them the question, are you under the impression this is a do-nothing legislature? And I got them going. They all started holding up their hand, yes. And I said, well, let me ask you something. I'll take my clue from you. Is what we do in Santa Fe and what we do in every state and what they do at the federal government, we pass laws that restrict your individual freedoms and restrict your business decisions, tell you how you will or will not do business. Now, we only did that 200 and some times this last session. How many laws do you want us to pass in a so-called free society restricting your freedoms before you think we're successful? Well, that's a much different viewpoint, because I think the most successful legislators or legislatures that you ordinarily have would be those that don't pass very many laws, because many laws that people are attempting to put on the books should not be there because it is restricting individuals' freedoms. So when you're looking for a candidate, besides sending out these brochures and things, we will also knock on doors. And unfortunately, I'm convinced, I don't care if you went to people's doors at 3 a.m. in the morning, there's never more than 40% of the people home. I don't care when you go. But they know that you're running. If people will call the candidate, and most times we put out brochures and things, we'll have a telephone number. If people will call, I personally, when I campaign, if you call me and you're in my district, and it's kind of interesting, you can almost tell by the tone of voice that, well, this is going to be very interesting because this person I think is going to have a different viewpoint than I do on a lot of issues. I will get in my vehicle, I will come to your home, and I'll spend as much time as you want to spend. And I particularly like to have conversations and dialogue with people who think that they have a different viewpoint or who may even have a different viewpoint on the issues than I do. If you and I sit down and talk, and if politically every time I say something you say, that you agree with it, and that's all there is, that's not much of a dialogue. Worked that in, didn't it? But if I come over and you've got a different viewpoint, and you say, hey, Houston, I think that you're full of beans. I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that. My wife thinks I'm crazy, because if I get 2 invitations to speak, and if one of them is a so-called friendly group, and if another one is an opposition group, I will always accept the opposition group. And she says, why do you do that? Because I'm getting ready to learn something, either They've got information I need, and perhaps I have some information I can share with them, but we're getting ready to have meaningful dialogue. Don't look for candidates that when you start asking questions, they're giving you the answer that they think that you want to hear, because most of these answers, a yes or no, can be very simplistic. But in order to reach and get to that yes or no, oftentimes takes hours and hours of reading, of analyzing, of visiting with people, so you get enough information on which to base a decision. And I guess the biggest concern, one of the biggest concerns I have, is the fact that people react emotionally to issues. And I understand we're all human, there's some emotions in it. They have a tendency to react emotionally as opposed to trying to find out what the facts are so that we can all try to make an objective decision.
So a lot of times this is important, what didn't happen as it is what did happen.
Mike, I will promise you, as I sit here today, and having analyzed the political process as a student from the outside, as a businessman before I became a candidate, and as a voter, and as a candidate, that most of the time in a democracy, what does not happen in Santa Fe, and sometimes we're up all night fighting these issues, and we get nasty, negative headlines in the papers that we're being obstructionist because we're trying to keep a certain philosophy from prevailing, because it's not a neat little package. It's not a Sunday school picnic in the legislative process. It's not designed to be.
Right.
That what does not happen is almost always more important to the overall welfare of the people than what does happen.
Let's take a short break for our parenting tip, and please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Children and guns are a deadly combination. In the last 5 years, 25 of New Mexico's children have been killed accidentally while playing with loaded guns. An additional 200 children were shot through gunplay over the same period. Almost all of these injuries occurred when children found loaded, unsecured guns at home. Please don't let your children become one of these statistics. If you have guns at home, for any reason, please keep them unloaded. Keep them locked in a safe place, away from your children. Use locked trigger guards, and keep ammunition stored in a separate location. This message has been brought to you by the Emergency Medical Department of the University of New Mexico School of Medicine. As a personal side note, I'd like to mention that good quality locking trigger guards are available for less than $10 each. If you own a gun, chances are it's worth several $100s. Isn't it worth an additional $10 to safeguard your child's precious life or the life of your child's playmate?
Hi, we're Los Lobos.
Survival is important to every community.
And right now, AIDS threatens all of us.
The only cure for AIDS is prevention. You don't have to have sex, but if you do,
stay with your own partner and use a condom to help protect yourself.
please avoid drugs, and especially don't share needles.
Look around at your family.
And your community. That's who you're saving, because survival means preventing AIDS.
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. You're watching Public Access Television from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our guest today is Senator Les Houston, and we're talking about the importance of the average man on the street getting political in this election year. Senator Houston, do you have any advice to the public on how they should approach politics this year?
Well, you know, Mike, unfortunately, politics is very complex, and particularly in a democracy, because we have a country that's based on the premise that you and I may not agree philosophically on an issue or what the answer should be, but each of us have a right to try to impose that philosophy, excuse me, on as many people as we can, so that philosophy or philosophy will prevail. That's what goes on in the political process.
Right.
Some people try to pretend like that's not the case. Of course it is. I'm convinced that if you took 3 people and put them on a desert island, you'd have politics. 2 will gang up on 1 to try to have their way. That 1 is going to spend a lot of sleepless nights trying to figure out how can I get one of them on my side. We have politics in our daily life. If you're in a family, there's politics is nothing more in one instance than people jockeying for position. The thing that makes ours sometimes so difficult to understand is that we all have a right, and we must take in. See, I don't have to agree with what your position is, But I will agree with the fact and respect it that you have a right to have that position. So people should not be turned off because people have a different viewpoint or because their viewpoint does not always prevail. It's the responsibility of every citizen, I feel, that has a right to worship where they want to travel, to seek the type of employment they wish to seek. There's so many benefits that we have had provided by democracy, but those benefits are accompanied by responsibility. And I think the breakdown is that people are not accepting that responsibility, and we all cannot be elected officials, but we can serve and make a contribution to the democratic process at different levels. The one thing that I would hope that everyone listening today would say to themselves, I do not want to be a freeloader on democracy. These people, our forefathers, put in place a good system. There's other people trying to make it work, and I, whatever their name is, am going to do my part. I will not shirk my responsibility. It will be frustrating. They cannot measure it. It's something they got to carry in their heart that once they've put out this effort that they know that they've made a contribution, because that's all any of us who are elected. That's the way we feel every night, that we put our head on the pillow. We think this is a better state because of our commitment and contribution. I couldn't prove it to you, Mike, if you asked me to go to court of law, but I know in my heart, and I encourage them to have that same feeling.
So basically, talk's cheap. And if you don't like something, it's not somebody else's responsibility. The society we live in is not a homogeneous society. It's built on the conflict of philosophies,
The diversity of all of our peoples.
In a war of ideas, which the man who takes the action is the man who gets the results more than likely. I think that's a real important message. Any last minute comments?
Well, you said talk is cheap. That's true unless you're paying for an ad on TV when you're running for a political office, and I will assure you that it's not cheap. Yeah, folks, politics is a wonderful thing. If we removed and if we changed our system of government today, where we took away all of our rights, people who will not walk across the street now to participate in politics, Mike, as we sit here, I'm convinced that within a month they would be going to secret meetings, risking their lives, trying to secure for themselves again the very thing that we've got now that we're not protecting.
I'd like to thank you for being on the program today. I really would. This has been fun. And we'd also like to thank everyone who helped make the program possible, especially our guest, yourself, and the fine crew that we have. And we'd like to thank our viewers for watching. Check your program for the times this show airs. I guess what we're saying is that it's up to each American as an individual to make a difference in their lives, and the difference we make in our lives affects the lives of everyone else. So I'm Mike Rivas, this is Senator Les Houston, and we're telling you to shoot from the hip and love from the heart. Bye-bye.